Welcome to today's episode of Insights with Us. I'm Anastasia, a licensed professional counselor, owner of Happy Mind Wellness Company, a Colorado-based therapy practice, and creator of this podcast. My goal is to use this platform to help others find their voice as we share our journeys and show support as we learn more about ourselves and life. Growth happens when we get uncomfortable, which happens when we sit with new ideas we haven't sat with before. I hope we can work on this journey of personal growth and understanding together. As a disclaimer, there may be swearing in this podcast, but sometimes we get caught up in the human experience. It happens. And sometimes we can talk about difficult or activating topics. So maybe put on some headphones if you need to, and remember that support exists for you if you want it. Today, we are going to be focusing on different types of identity and the complexity and intersectionality of identity. This is a complicated and unfortunately politically charged topic, so I want to name that this is a basic exploration of what exists out there and how it can layer. I also want to name that I am not telling you personally how to identify or how to view your identities or what you should believe. You are you, and you get to believe and think however you want to. Nothing I say should be taken as 100% fact, because we are all different and show up differently, and there is a lot of wiggle room within identity explorations. So with that said, let's dive deeper and see if we can create some insight today. Last week, we talked about the child-free lifestyle. And this is an identity that someone could hold. I hold it, Ray holds it, many others hold it. But you can also choose to identify as a parent or want to eventually identify as a parent, depending on where you're at in your life. And so before we talk about other types of identities in this episode, I want to take a minute and share some additional facts that we didn't quite get to last episode, but I really want to make sure that I get right. Explicitly, I had mentioned last episode that U.S. maternal mortality rates are higher than everywhere else. And I want to clarify some statistics around this because this fact is true, and it is in comparison to other high-income earning countries. The CDC tracks maternal mortality rates, which they define as the death of a woman who was pregnant or within 42 days after pregnancy, and the cause of death is related to that pregnancy or aggravated by pregnancy or by the management of that pregnancy. Basically, how were you taken care of? Fortunately, maternal mortality rates have gone down between 2021 and 2022, which is great. But until then, it was actually on the rise. And so to just give these numbers briefly, in 2018, 658 women died. In 2019, 754 women died. In 2020, 861 women died. And in 2021, 1,205 women died. Now in 2022, which is the last date that they have released, only 817 women passed. So this was lower than 2021, but pretty on par for 2020. These numbers are typically tracked across the globe by how many women died per 100,000. Now, the Commonwealth Fund in June of 2024 took statistics across a whole bunch of different countries all over the world and compared them. And the U.S. was ranked highest for maternal mortality rates. The United States overall had 22.3 women out of 100,000 die. But they also broke it up between Black, white, and Hispanic identifying women. Black women's mortality rate skyrockets to 49.5, while white women are at 19, and Hispanic women die at a rate of 16.9. Again, just for your brain in comparison, that is 49.5 compared to 19 compared to 16.9. That is a huge difference, which is why this is something that gets talked about so much, especially for people of color. The next country with the highest mortality rate is Chile, with a rate of 14.3. Again, 14.3 compared to almost 50. That is a huge disparity. New Zealand is a close third at 13.6, and Norway had a mortality rate of 0. I am sharing these numbers because the United States is failing the women of our country and failing those who don't identify as a woman but can still become pregnant. We could do better. Other countries have done better. We are failing. We cannot just say that we are the best and it's true. We have to continually work to stay the best. And when we start to fall behind, instead of plugging our ears and going, nope, we're the best, I don't care what you have to say, we have to be willing to work on it, to progress, to learn from our mistakes. And that is the only way that we are going to be able to stay on top. Women are not taken care of, and our bodies are not understood. And if someone does become pregnant by choice, by accident, or by force, our healthcare system is not ensuring that the child and the parent are healthy all the way through pregnancy and postpartum. We have a long way to go before our community can help ensure all lives are safe. If you choose to have a child and you are the one carrying that baby to term, make sure you do research for yourself on how to stay healthy and safe. And remember to advocate for yourself if something seems wrong. The healthcare system in the United States is flawed. It misses stuff. And I want you and your baby to stay healthy and safe no matter what. I also hope to have someone who identifies as a mother on the podcast soon, so that all of you have a chance to hear a perspective other than choosing to be child-free. So please keep following Insights with us if you'd like to hear that journey as well. Now, back to identities. Most of the time when people talk about identities, especially in the politically charged world that we live in, the conversations revolve around sexual identity or gender identity. But there is so much more to it than that. Even as I write this script, I can hear my anxious protector inside of me warning me. There are people on the internet that will hate you for this. They'll take your words out of context. You shouldn't share anything personal about your own experiences or identity. It'll come back to hurt you. But I have decided to share today because thanks to Brene Brown, we know shame thrives in the shadows. And I want to fight that stigma that you have to hide who you are in order to be safe. I want to be who I am, out and open and proud. Psychology Today defines identity as the memories, experiences, relationships, and values that creates one sense of self. Your identities are who you are. The thing about this definition is you are constantly gaining memories and experiences, changing or adding relationships to your life. And as you grow as a person, your values might shift too. Who you are isn't going to do a 180, but how you show up and who you want to be might change as you grow in life. For example, I identify as a woman, but I also identify as an athlete, a nerd, a sister, a daughter, a dog mom, a third culture kid, a business owner, a perfectionist, a recovering perfectionist, someone with chronic pain, which took me a while to accept that definition and that identity, and a hell of a lot more. Some of these identities might seem to contradict each other, like being an athlete with chronic pain, but in my world, they make sense together. I fought against my chronic pain identity for a long time because I didn't want it to mess with my athlete and hardworking identities. But I honestly became a business owner so that I could work within my chronic pain and not make myself more sick trying to stick to society's expectations of how I should show up. I have shifted how I exercise and how hard I push myself depending on how bad my pain is that day. So this chronic pain identity of mine, like I said, I added it more recently, but I'm really glad that I did because now I get to show up more often feeling like myself. Anytime there is a big shift in our lives, there is then a question of how will it affect who we are and therefore our identities. I started getting debilitating headaches working at my last job where I had 10-hour shifts. And honestly, I was getting those debilitating headaches way back in college, but I just pushed through those, whereas this one, I was getting them every single day. And I used to take naps in my office before driving home because I was worried that I'd be unsafe on the roads. It wasn't until I named and let that identity exist that I was able to realize what I needed, and I was able to set my own schedule and be in charge of how I showed up in my career. There are also identities that don't change much, but how we view them do. And each person holds their identities with a different amount of weight. I tend to have this belief that I am who I am, and I've always felt this way. And yes, identifying who I am can be useful, but it doesn't define me. Even if I don't have an exact label for every identity of mine, who I am doesn't change. But I have met with and worked with people who have had challenges or trauma around their identities. And often I find that being able to have that identity and to know it and to understand it and others respect it can mean so much. It's important sometimes to be able to name your experience. And I'm here to tell you that no matter how you identify, if it changes or stays the same, if you try to figure it out or don't, you are you, and that won't ever change. One of my favorite resources for starting to explore the more complicated identities is the Gender Unicorn. And when I say complicated, I mean more politically charged, but just go with that. And I'm going to do my best to remember to post the Gender Unicorn on my Instagram at Insights With Us Podcast, but you can also just search it. It'll pop up. The Gender Unicorn shows us the main different types of identities that we can have and how they show up. I love this because it shows the spectrum and how it's not always black and white. First on the list is gender identity. Gender identity is how we feel inside, not what others can see. You could identify as male, female, non-binary, or just other. I personally identify as a cisgendered woman, but I am okay with she or they pronouns. Basically, I just don't want to be called he, him. On the flip side, gender expression is what people see. You might dress more feminine or more masculine, or maybe you dress a little bit more neutral, more androgynous. I personally like to mix it up, and I talk about this in my Art and Authenticity episode with Steffi. But growing up, I was always called a tomboy because I dressed masculine. I loved sports shorts and t-shirts, whatever was the easiest to run or climb in on a moment's notice. As I got older, I started to embrace my femininity more, and sometimes I show up in dresses or heels. Occasionally, I'll even put on some eyeliner. But my go-to uniform is leggings or sweats with a tank top, hoodie if it's winter. And I have had the privilege of being able to choose. And I'm not judged or bullied for what I wear. Many people on this earth are not so lucky. Now, there are extremes to this. I'm going to give a less extreme example. But imagine that you wanted to wear overalls to the gym and everyone decided to judge you. In fact, they shamed you for wearing overalls because everybody else just wore shorts and a t-shirt. And that they told you that you were wrong, that you shouldn't ever wear overalls to the gym, even though you wearing overalls doesn't actually affect their day in the slightest. That would be pretty confusing and hurtful. And people have a tendency to get angry when others don't show up in the way that they want. This can even turn to violence. When people show up in a way that they don't understand, it causes this confusion, which comes out as anger. But I am here to tell you that it doesn't actually affect your life if the person next to you chooses to wear heels or not. The last wedding I went to, most of the women showed up in heels. I showed up in dance sneakers. And I got so many compliments on it because it doesn't actually matter that I didn't wear heels. Next on the gender unicorn list is sex assigned at birth. This is not a spectrum because this is literally when the doctor looks at your anatomy and goes, it's a girl or it's a boy, or 1.7% of the time, it's intersex, which means that person is born with neither a penis or a vagina or born with a mixture of the two. Basically, it's not black or white. 1 to 2 out of every 100 people are born with non-binary parts. Or in America, that is 5,666,100 people who are born intersex. If you are looking at the Gender Unicorn resource, right below sex assigned at birth are 2 different types of attraction: physical attraction and emotional attraction. If you want to get into the weeds, there are several other types of attraction too, including intellectual attraction, sexual attraction, which some people group this with physical attraction and some people think of it as separate. I'm one of those that likes to separate it because I can be physically attracted to somebody but not want to have anything to do with them. Emotional attraction is who you are interested in without the physical aspect. You are interested in emotional closeness with someone, while physical attraction is liking someone's physical appearance. Hey, you're hot. You're beautiful. You're pretty. Wow, you have very symmetrical features. Whatever that looks like for you. And yes, it could include sexual attraction, but it is specifically being interested more in how someone looks than who they are. Now, I want to remind all of you who are still with me that there is no one right answer here. And all identities are individual and can change at any time depending on what season you're in, how your life changes, how you learn more about yourself, and what matters to you. I personally am biromantic, meaning that I am attracted romantically or emotionally to both men and women. And then I identify as a demisexual, which means I am only physically or interested in intimacy with someone that I have a close emotional connection to. It is under the umbrella of asexuality, and I have learned that that can really confuse people. I have had several partners who did not understand how I could identify as asexual and still be interested in dating or having a life with someone. It is also confusing for partners when I go through a honeymoon phase with lots of emotional connection and they think, oh, wow, you said you're asexual, but clearly I'm the exception. And then the emotional intimacy starts to weaken or it isn't prioritized and we become more distant and suddenly there's no connection. It's gone, which really sucks because that just puts shame and trauma on me. And instead of having a conversation and trying to understand where the nuance is, it was just black or white. Either you are or you aren't. And if you started out one way, there's no way you could change it. But in reality, I'm both. If we work on our emotional connection, there's a good chance I will continue to be interested in you and staying in a relationship. But if we don't prioritize this connection, my brain and my body disconnect. And I cannot convince myself to reconnect without any sort of emotional component. Now, I know a lot of people are just like this naturally. It is very human that if you don't have a connection with someone, you're not going to want to hang out with them much longer. That does not mean that you are also asexual. Sexuality is fluid. Sometimes you're in the mood, sometimes you're not. Sometimes you'll have a crush on someone, and sometimes you'll find them detestable. None of this is wrong. It's about who you are in that moment, how you're feeling, and what version of yourself is showing up. What matters to you? The more you learn about yourself, the more you'll be able to determine what matters and what's a deal breaker, and what headspace helps you feel in the mood versus the headaches where you can't even think about it. I've learned that I need that prioritization of one-on-one time, of feeling connected, of being heard. And my current partner is amazing at understanding the flexibility of my identities. If we are socializing a lot or on separate schedules or just haven't been able to spend time together one-on-one, thanks to my past, I start feeling really guilty and pressured to make him feel seen and better. And I push through my disconnection to try to make him happy. And what's amazing is every time he notices this, he will pause and he will reassure me that he doesn't expect us to feel emotionally connected right now. Of course I feel disconnected. We haven't been spending time together. And he reminds me that I don't have to force myself to show up differently to make him happy. We both name in that moment that it's temporary. And we agree when we need to check in next so that we can prioritize each other. That we can talk about how we're feeling and if we're connected or disconnected and what the next step could look like. Instead of getting angry that pressure or disconnect is there, we use it as a sign that we haven't been communicating or that I'm trying to read his mind. Yay, anxiety. And then once we can notice it, we pause and we talk through it together. And if you're like, oh my God, how? Don't worry, we'll get there. You'll get there. The first step is letting it be okay to not be one way or another, especially not all of the time. And if you're listening to this and thinking that you have so many questions about who you are and where you stand with your identities, my recommendation is starting small in an area that feels manageable. Maybe start with non-romantic related identities, like, are you an athlete? Do you identify as a sibling? What are your hobbies? Can you name that you're a baker or a writer or a runner? Do you have trouble giving yourself permission to name that interest as a part of who you are? What's so uncomfortable about giving yourself that identity? And now I'm going to dive into the more romantic, physical, and sexual identities. So if you feel some discomfort, feel free to push through and keep listening. But if this is something that you're just not ready to listen to, feel free to skip ahead. But going deeper, if you want to start exploring your romantic, physical, or sexual identities, you can also start small there. Don't do anything that you are uncomfortable with. And sometimes finding what is a yes for you starts with knowing what is a no. For example, in Authenticity and Art, that episode with Steffi, I open up about how I know polyamory or open relationships or multiple partners was a no for me for several reasons. And because I know that polyamory was a no, that means that my yes is a single committed partner. So that's what I looked for. Another great intro to exploring your sexual identity is listening to romantic novels, audiobooks with sex scenes, or even just straight audio porn. It can be less intense and have less stigma attached than visual porn, and much less intense than acting out any potential interests you might have with someone. It's also important to note that what revs your engine or accelerates that vibe might not be what you enjoy in the real world. But it's a piece of information for you to gather. And things to pay attention to might be, do you only read or listen to scenes between a man and a woman? Do you like reading about or hearing about two women getting it on, two men? Is there a specific physique that excites you more than others? Like maybe you prefer people more feminine, more masculine, or even androgynous. Whatever you end up looking at or thinking about more often is likely close to what you prefer. Have curiosity there and pay attention to any patterns, but don't do anything that makes you feel uncomfortable or unsafe. At the end of the day, choosing to explore your identity is your choice and yours alone. You never have to if you don't want to. But if you do want to find answers, start small. and build from an area that you are comfortable with. For anyone who is worried about how others identify, I like to think of it in terms of names. If someone introduces themselves as Sam, I'm not going to start calling them Charlie. You identify how you identify, and nothing I say or believe will change that. If your name is Sam, I'm going to call you Sam. If 5 years later you tell me you don't feel like a Sam, so you're going to change your name to Taylor, well, it might take me a few tries, and I might randomly and accidentally call you Sam here and there, thanks to memory associations and how brain categorization works. But I'm going to call you Taylor. I have actually found that for people in my life that use they, them pronouns, the only time I typically mispronoun them is when there is someone else in my life who shares their name but does not share their pronoun. And I tend to mispronoun whoever I spend the time with the least. So if I'm spending time with someone named Sam who identifies as a him, and then I meet a Sam who identifies as a they, I might accidentally call them him sometimes. But if I spend time with a Taylor who identifies as they, them, and then I meet a Taylor who identifies as a her, I might call her them a lot. And this is something that I'm aware of, that I am working on. And a lot of it just comes down to being very intentional with my words and being present instead of just relying on my brain to get the words right. You get to be yourself, and you are not wrong for wanting to be that person, no matter who that person is. And I'm really hoping that something we talked about today resonated with you, and that you found some insight about where you could start in this next part of your journey, if that's where you are. If you learned anything today, let yourself sit with that idea for a little while longer. And if you have any questions for this podcast or any themes you'd like us to focus on in the future, send us a message on Instagram at insightswithUspodcast, or send us an email at insightswithus@gmail.com. If you enjoy this podcast and want to hear more, please follow, like, or subscribe. If you want to support the continuation of this podcast, you can donate. To do so, visit my website and donate on Podbean's Patron program, or find Anastasia Soroka, that's me, on buymeacoffee.com. I appreciate you, and I appreciate that you are listening. Thank you for creating Insight with us.